Picture this a dimly lit workshop in the heart of a medieval town, where the rhythmic clinking of metal fills the air. A skilled artisan sits at a loom, but instead of threads, their hands move with tiny rings of iron, each one carefully interlaced with the next. This isn't just a craft, it's a paradox. These weavers created something both beautiful and deadly. Chainmail, a tapestry of metal that could mean the difference between life and death on the battlefield. But here's the question that lingers like the smoke from their forges. Were they artists or arms dealers? Did they see themselves as creators of intricate patterns or suppliers of tools for war? This is the heart of the chainmail weaver's dilemma. Artistry versus war on the loom, a story that pulls us into the tangled web of medieval life, where craftsmanship and conflict were inextricably linked. Think about the pride these artisans must have felt as they bent each ring into place, their work demanding patience, precision, and an almost poetic sense of rhythm. The best chainmail wasn't just functional, it was a masterpiece, with rings so finely wrought they could shimmer like fabric in the sunlight. Yet, with every finished piece, they knew it would soon be stained with blood. How did they reconcile the beauty of their craft with its brutal purpose? Were they celebrated for their skill or overshadowed by the violence their work enabled? This isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a mirror to our own world, where the things we create often have consequences we can't control. By the time we're done, you'll never look at chainmail the same way again. We'll trace the journey of these forgotten artisans, from the bustling markets where they sold their wares to the battlefields where their work was put to the test. Along the way, we'll uncover the cultural forces that shaped their lives, the guilds that protected their secrets, the lords who demanded their labor, and the moral weight they carried with every stitch. This is more than a tale of metal and war. It's a story about human ingenuity caught in the crossfire of history. So let's step into their workshop, feel the heat of the forge, and unravel the threads of this fascinating dilemma together. The story of chainmail begins long before the clatter of medieval forges echoed through Europe. Ancient warriors from Rome to Persia draped themselves in this metallic fabric, but it was during the Middle Ages that the craft truly flourished. Picture a blacksmith's workshop where fire and hammer transformed raw iron into delicate rings, each one shaped, flattened, and linked by hand. This wasn't just metalwork, it was a fusion of disciplines, borrowing techniques from textile weaving and applying them to armor. The result was a flexible, durable second skin that could turn aside slashing blades while allowing knights to move with surprising freedom. What made chainmail extraordinary wasn't just its function, it was the sheer devotion required to create it. A single shirt might demand tens of thousands of rings, each meticulously riveted or welded shut. Some artisans specialized in crafting rings so fine they resembled lace, while others produced heavier patterns designed to withstand the brutal force of a warhammer. Guilds guarded these techniques closely, passing down secrets through generations like sacred knowledge. Yet, for all its artistry, chainmail was never just decoration. Every twist of the pliers, every hammer stroke, was done with the grim understanding that this work would soon be tested in life or death combat. So how do these craftsmen square their pride in their work with its lethal purpose? Part of the answer lies in the medieval worldview, where war and craftsmanship were inseparable. A skilled weaver might take equal pride in a lord's ceremonial tunic or a soldier's hauberk. Both were testaments to their mastery. But there's also evidence that some struggled with the duality. Church records mention armorers who donated to monasteries, perhaps seeking absolution for their trade. Others took solace in the belief that their work protected lives as much as it enabled battle. In a world where violence was ever present, chainmail wasn't just a tool of war. It was a necessity, woven as much from societal expectations as from iron. The evolution of chainmail mirrors the changing face of warfare itself. Early designs were simple, little more than metal shirts, but as battles grew more complex, so did the armor. Soon, artisans were crafting coifs to shield the neck, mittens to protect hands, even full body suits for the wealthiest knights. Each innovation demanded new levels of skill, turning chainmail from a crude defense into a canvas for ingenuity. Yet, by the late Middle Ages, the rise of plate armor began to eclipse the craft. The very artistry that made chainmail remarkable, its flexibility, its intricate construction couldn't compete with the brute strength of solid steel. The weaver's dilemma had reached its end, not because they abandoned their craft, but because the world moved on without them. The loom, a humble frame of wood and thread, the heartbeat of every medieval household where women spun wool into warmth, where tapestries told stories in vibrant color. But in the hands of a chainmail weaver, this familiar tool transformed into something entirely different. No longer just an instrument of domestic craft, it became a bridge between two worlds, the delicate artistry of weaving and the unforgiving demands of war. Picture the same rhythmic motion, the passing of thread replaced by the linking of iron rings, the shuttle's glide, now the steady click of metal finding its place. This wasn't merely adaptation, it was reinvention. The loom, once a symbol of nourishment and comfort, now bore the weight of armor meant to deflect blades. What's fascinating is how seamlessly the language of weaving carried over into this deadly new craft. Artisans spoke of weaving mail, of patterns in the rings, even of the drape of a finished hauberk. The techniques mirrored textile work, alternating rows, tight closures, even decorative flourishes like contrasting ring colors for nobility. Yet every choice served a brutal purpose. A loose stitch could mean a fatal weakness in battle. A flaw in the weave might spell doom for the wearer. This duality haunted the craft. The same hands that could create a sleeve as supple as linen also knew it would soon be splattered with mud and blood. Perhaps that's why the loom became such a powerful metaphor for the weaver's moral tightrope. Unlike swordsmiths, whose work was unapologetically violent, chainmail artisans existed in a gray area. Their creations were defensive, even life-saving, yet they enabled warfare to continue. Some historians argue the loom's repurposing was inevitable, that medieval society saw no contradiction in beauty serving battle. After all, swords were etched with prayers, shields painted with saints, but others point to quieter rebellions, weavers who smuggled hidden symbols into their work, like tiny crosses woven into the armpit, seams where only the wearer would know. These subtle acts suggest a deeper awareness of the dilemma, an attempt to reclaim something sacred from the machinery of war. By the late Middle Ages, the loom's symbolism grew even more complex. As plate armor made chainmail obsolete for the wealthy, many weavers turned back to textiles, their skills funneled into creating lavish garments for courts. Yet the legacy of those metallic fabrics lingered. You can see it in the language of later armorers, in the way Renaissance artists depicted chainmail with almost loving detail, its rings rendered as meticulously as lace. The loom, once a tool of war, had come full circle, but the questions it raised never faded. Can artistry exist independent of its purpose? Does beauty justify utility, or does utility corrupt beauty? The chainmail weavers left no manifestos, no diaries to answer. Only their work remains, a million silent rings, still whispering the tension between creation and destruction. Imagine spending months, sometimes years bending, linking, and riveting thousands of tiny rings into a single shimmering hauberk. For medieval chainmail weavers, this wasn't just labor, it was a testament to their skill, a wearable masterpiece that bore their name. Some artisans went so far as to weave hidden signatures into their work, tiny flourishes only the keenest eye would notice, a cluster of brass rings near the collar, or a subtle twist in the pattern at the hem. These weren't just marks of ownership, they were declarations of pride, a way to whisper across centuries, "I made this." Yet that pride carried a weight few modern craftsmen could fathom. Every stitch in their metallic fabric had a dual purpose, to showcase artistry and to stop a blade from piercing flesh. Records from guild halls hint at the quiet tension simmering beneath their craftsmanship. Some weavers donated portions of their earnings to churches, as if seeking blessing for their trade. Others, like the famed armorer Thomas of Bruges, left behind journals filled with sketches of floral patterns, designs he never used in his work, as if dreaming of a world where his hands created beauty untouched by war. The moral landscape these artisans navigated was anything but simple. In an era where knights swore oaths on sacred relics and battles were framed as divine missions, chainmail occupied a paradoxical space. A well-crafted hauberk could save a life, yet it also prolonged the very conflicts that demanded such protection. Some weavers leaned into this ambiguity, arguing their work was a shield for the righteous. Others, like the anonymous craftsman who etched a cross into every 100th ring, seemed to wrestle with it, embedding their doubts into the armor itself. What's striking is how their legacy split along cultural lines. In prosperous cities, guilds celebrated master weavers with feasts and titles, elevating them as pillars of the community. But in regions scarred by constant warfare, armorers were often viewed with uneasy respect, admired for their skill, yet shadowed by the violence their work enabled. A French chronicle from the 13th century recounts a haunting encounter. A traveling weaver, asked to repair a nobleman's mail, burst into tears upon recognizing his own handiwork, now rusted with bloodstains he couldn't scrub away. By the time the age of plate armor dawned, many chainmail weavers faced an unexpected reckoning. The very artistry that defined their craft, the flexibility, the intricate linking became obsolete overnight. Some adapted, turning their looms back to textiles or apprenticing as blacksmiths, but others clung stubbornly to their trade, producing ceremonial mail for tournaments or churches, as if trying to reclaim its purity. Their signatures, once hidden in battle-worn armor, now adorned decorative pieces destined for display cases. Perhaps that was their quiet victory. In the end, the beauty outlasted the bloodshed. In the bustling markets of medieval Europe, chainmail weaving wasn't just a craft, it was a paycheck. Guild halls stood as the beating heart of this trade, where masters scrutinized every ring and rivet, ensuring only the finest work bore their seal. These weren't mere quality checks, they were lifelines. A guild stamp meant steady work, a fair price, and protection from cutthroat competition. But behind the orderly ledgers and regulated workshops lurked a harsher truth. War dictated the rhythm of their labor. When conflict erupted, orders flooded in, and weavers worked by candlelight to meet the demand. Peacetime might mean crafting delicate aventails for noble processions, but wartime turned their workshops into assembly lines for survival. The ethical tightrope these artisans walked was woven as tightly as their mail. Consider the ledger of a 15th century Flemish guild, detailing payments for 40 hauberks urgent. That single line captures the desperation of lords preparing for battle, and the weavers who had no choice but to oblige. Refusing a wartime commission wasn't just risky, it could mean exile from the guild, stripping a family of their income. Yet financial pressure wasn't the only force at play. Some weavers found loopholes in their moral quandaries, like the craftswoman from York who secretly used inferior iron for bulk orders, reserving her finest work for local militias she believed fought justly. Others, like the German guild that mandated prayers for peace before each workday, folded their unease into ritual. What's often overlooked is how deeply economics shaped the chainmail's very design. Peacetime allowed for artistry, expressive patterns, mixed metals, even gilding for ceremonial pieces, but wartime demanded speed, leading to standardized sizes and simpler weaves. Surviving account books from Milan reveal a grim calculus. Blacksmiths were paid per finished hauberk, not per hour, pushing weavers to prioritize quantity over craftsmanship. The result, armor that saved budgets more often than lives. By the late Middle Ages, the trade's fragility became impossible to ignore. When the 100 Years' War drained coffers across France, armorers faced a new nightmare, nobles demanding payment plans or bartering land for mail. Some weavers became de facto bankers, their workshops cluttered with promissory notes and IOUs. Others turned to subcontracting, farming out rings to peasant families paid pennies per thousand, a system that blurred the line between artisan and exploiter. The guilds, once proud guardians of tradition, now policed desperation, punishing those who cut corners to feed their children. Perhaps the most poignant relic of this struggle isn't a hauberk, but a lawsuit. In 1423, the widow of a Burgundian weaver sued a knight for unpaid armor, her petition pleading not just for coin, but for recognition of her husband's sweat and soul. The court ruled in her favor, yet the judgment included an unusual addendum. The knight was ordered to return the blood-stained mail for proper burial. Even in victory, the weaver's legacy was tangled with the violence he'd enabled. This was the inescapable knot of their trade, where every ring sold was both a meal on the table and a step deeper into complicity. The clash between faith and craft was a quiet storm in the hearts of medieval chainmail weavers. In a world where the church condemned violence yet blessed armies, these artisans found themselves caught in a moral twilight. A 14th-century manuscript from Lincoln Cathedral tells of a weaver named Elias who refused to work during Lent, calling his craft a fasting of the hands, only to be ordered by his bishop to resume, as knights needed armor for a righteous campaign. This tension between doctrine and duty was as tightly woven as the rings themselves. Religious texts offered contradictory guidance. Augustine's writings allowed for just war, suggesting defense was holy, while Bernard of Clairvaux railed against the vanity of armored pride. Some weavers latched onto the loopholes. Guild records from Cologne show masters citing biblical passages about David's armor or the belt of truth from Ephesians to justify their trade. Others took a darker view, like the anonymous penitent in a Burgundian monastery ledger who confessed to weaving death before taking vows. The physical act of crafting mail became its own form of penance. Certain workshops adopted rituals like dipping finished hauberks in holy water or stitching tiny relics into linings. A remarkable survival from Florence is a sleeve of mail with a parchment scrap still trapped between rings, bearing a scribbled prayer. May these rings turn blades as faith turns sin. For every artisan who saw their work as godly protection, another wrestled with sleepless nights. The chronicler Jean Froissart recounts meeting a weaver who claimed each rivet he closed echoed like the hammer of Pilate's nails. Yet the church itself was often the weaver's best customer. Monasteries commissioned mail for crusaders, and bishops demanded discounts for holy orders. This hypocrisy wasn't lost on craftsmen. A satirical poem from the margin of a guild ledger mocks a bishop's envoy haggling over the price of salvation. But the deepest conflict may have been internal. The York Guild's annual play, a rare surviving performance text, depicts their patron saint, a fictional armorer, tormented by visions of his mail failing in battle until an angel declares his hands clean by craft, not consequence. What emerges from these fragments isn't resolution, but raw humanity. Some weavers donated their finest work to churches as votive offerings, hanging hauberks beside altars like metallic prayers. Others, like the Italian master Lorenzo, who inscribed his workshop wall with "I shield the body, God must shield the soul," carved out uneasy truces between workshop and worship. Their legacy isn't in answers, but in the very rings they left behind, each one a tiny mirror, reflecting the eternal struggle to create in a broken world. History remembers the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the guildmaster's seal pressed into finished mail, but rarely does it recall the hands that polished each ring, the fingers that sorted them by size, the quiet labor that kept workshops running. Women were the unseen backbone of chainmail production, their contributions brushed aside like iron filings swept from the forge floor. While guild records name mail masters, tax rolls and household inventories tell a different story. Widows inheriting workshops, daughters apprenticed to their fathers, wives bartering finished hauberks at market stalls. In a craft so deeply tied to war, their presence forces us to ask, did these women see themselves as artisans or accomplices? Take Marguerite of Provence, listed in a 13th century ledger simply as the armorer's wife, yet her husband's will reveal she managed his entire workshop during his campaigns. Or the enigmatic Magistra Maria, whose delicate riveting work appears in 6 surviving hauberks from Milan, her title hinting at rare female mastery. Their stories puncture the myth that chainmail was solely a man's domain. Women didn't just assist, they innovated. A curious pattern emerges in French workshops, where mail intended for female patrons often featured interior linings of silk thread, a subtle comfort likely devised by women weavers who understood the chafing of metal on skin. But their ethical burdens carried unique weight. While male artisans could distance themselves through guild solidarity or holy war rhetoric, women faced sharper scrutiny. Church sermons warned that wives who aided in the making of arms shared in the sin of bloodshed. Some, like the English weaver Agnes de Monte, countered by specializing in mail for town guards' work framed as protecting homes rather than fueling conquests. Others found loopholes in piety. The convent of St. Clare in Assisi quietly commissioned mail for crusading relatives, their nuns' prayers stitched between the rings like spiritual armor. The darkest shadows fell on those with least choice. Indentured girls in Venetian workshops left thumbprints in account books, marks instead of signatures beside notations of 20,000 rings filed. For them, the dilemma wasn't philosophical but survival. A haunting lawsuit from Toulouse describes a 12-year-old apprentice to a chainmailer, her fingers scarred by rust, who asked a priest if she'd go to hell for helping make death shirts. The question echoes across centuries, unanswered. Yet women also wielded the craft as power. Noble ladies like Elena of Aquitaine commissioned gilded mail as political gifts, turning armor into diplomacy. In rare cases, they wore it themselves. The chronicler Matthew Paris describes Countess Jean of Flanders leading knights in battle, her custom hauberk fitted to feminine form. These exceptions prove the rule. Where men's mail spoke of profession, women's signaled defiance. The ultimate irony. While history forgot their names, their work endured. X-rays of museum pieces now reveal women's signatures in the metal itself. A row of smaller rings near the hem, a spiral weave at the shoulders. Like the coded stitches in medieval embroidery, these hidden marks whisper rebellion. They tell us the chainmail dilemma wasn't just about art versus war, but about who got to decide which hands were clean. Hidden beneath the practical purpose of chainmail lies a secret language of beauty, one that turns functional armor into a canvas for expression. Picture a knight's hauberk not as a dull mesh of metal, but as a shimmering tapestry where every ring is placed with deliberate artistry. Some weavers arranged alternating rows of brass and iron, creating stripes that caught the light like woven gold. Others crafted intricate geometric patterns, diamonds, chevrons, even floral motifs visible only upon close inspection. These designs served no defensive purpose. So why did artisans invest precious hours on embellishments that might never be seen? The answer may lie in a single surviving sleeve from a 14th century German workshop. Upon magnification, conservators discovered tiny, deliberate irregularities. A cluster of rings arranged to form a rose, its petals visible only when the mail was flexed a certain way. The maker left no signature, just this hidden flourish. Was it vanity, piety, or quiet defiance? Similar discoveries hint at a broader trend. In Milan, wealthy patrons commissioned mail with gilded rivets, each one stamped with miniature coats of arms. In Paris, a guild master's ledger lists payments for the vine-patterned edging on a bishop's ceremonial aventail. These weren't just status symbols, they were declarations that craftsmanship could transcend brutality. Perhaps the most striking rebellion was in fit. While standard hauberks hung like metallic sacks, elite weavers tailored their work to the body's contours. A surviving example from the Tower of London shows how rings were subtly graduated smaller at the wrists to allow dexterity, slightly larger at the shoulders for mobility. The effect was both practical and poetic, armor that moved like a second skin, its elegance a silent rebuke to the crude violence it was meant to withstand. Some historians argue these refinements were purely market-driven, catering to nobles who saw war as theater, but others point to wills where artisans bequeathed their finest tools for the making of beautiful things, with no mention of war at all. The ultimate irony, many of these artistic touches inadvertently improved function. A 14th century Czech hauberk with a herringbone weave was initially dismissed as decorative, until testing revealed the pattern distributed impact more evenly than standard links. A French weaver's experiment with oval rings, likely intended to mimic fabric drape, unexpectedly made the mail more resistant to arrow penetration. Beauty and utility, it seems, were never truly at odds. What lingers is the evidence of hands yearning to create, even within constraints. A crudely repaired hauberk in a Spanish museum shows where its wearer patched battle damage with mismatched rings except near the heart, where someone took the time to replicate the original weave perfectly. This tiny act of preservation speaks volumes. In a world that demanded their craft serve violence, these artisans carved out spaces for something more. Their legacy isn't just in the mail that survived, but in the quiet insistence that even war's tools could carry grace. To a knight strapping on his hauberk before battle, chainmail wasn't just equipment, it was the difference between a clean thrust and a mortal wound. Chronicles from the Crusades describe warriors running their fingers over the rings like prayers, searching for flaws in the weave. One account tells of a Norman lord who survived a Saracen arrow strike to the chest, only to discover the shaft embedded in his mail, stopped by a single perfectly riveted ring. That moment of deliverance wasn't just luck, it was the silent handiwork of an artisan he'd never meet. Yet gratitude was uneven. While some knights bequeathed their armor to churches with plaques honoring their makers, others treated mail as disposable. Household records from England reveal nobles sending damaged hauberks back to workshops with curt notes like "mend this" or "make stronger," as if the armor had failed rather than the wearer's tactics. The disconnect cuts deep when you consider a weaver might recognize their own stitches on a bloodied tunic returned for repairs, their craftsmanship now a ledger of near misses and suffering. The intimacy between wearer and maker flickers in unexpected places. A 12th century poem by a Templar knight describes dreaming of his mail's song, the metallic whisper of rings sliding together as he moved, a sound he attributed to the weaver's rhythm still alive in the metal. Contrast that with the chilling practicality of mercenary contracts, where soldiers demanded mail of competent make as coldly as one might order a sack of grain. The value placed on chainmail often reflected the value placed on life itself. Archaeology offers poignant clues. A mass grave from the Battle of Visby revealed skeletons still clad in mail, their bones marked by precise patterns of injury rings shattered where blades struck, yet intact millimeters away where the weave held. Forensic analysis showed some mail had been hastily repaired before battle, the uneven rivets suggesting a weaver's rushed attempt to protect men he knew by name. Other digs uncovered personalized touches, initials scratched inside collars, saints' medallions woven into linings, even love knots threaded through the rings by wives or mothers. The psychological weight of mail reveals itself in odd moments. A French knight's memoir recounts refusing to wear a captured hauberk, fearing the ghost of its maker might resent protecting him. Conversely, a Swiss mercenary's diary boasts of taking mail from a dead foe, claiming the armor remembered its true master. These superstitions hint at an unspoken bond between creator and wearer, a recognition that the hands shaping the rings were, in some way, shaping the warrior's fate. Perhaps the most revealing artifact isn't armor at all, but a shopping list. Discovered in a Breton noble's ledger, it details a commission for 2 hauberks with an unusual request: extra padding at the left shoulder, where the lord's old wound ached in the cold. The specificity suggests conversations between fighter and craftsman, a collaboration where protection was tailored not just to bodies, but to lived experience. In those rare moments, the chainmail weaver's dilemma found resolution, not in grand philosophies, but in the quiet understanding that their work sheltered real lives with real scars. Not every shimmering hauberk ended up on the battlefield. In the grand halls of medieval Europe, chainmail took on a second life, one of pageantry and prestige. Picture a royal procession where sunlight glints off gilded rings, or a coronation where a king's mantle isn't fur or velvet, but delicate mail so finely woven it drapes like silk. These ceremonial pieces were feats of artistry, often commissioned for events where the only threat was a stray drop of wine. For the weavers who crafted them, these rare projects must have felt like a breath of air after years spent in the smoky shadow of war. Take the famous golden hauberk of Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, a masterpiece so light it could be crumpled in one hand, its rings alternating gold and silver to form intricate damascene patterns. Unlike battle mail, which prioritized function, this piece was designed to dazzle. The weaver paid triple the usual rate, left his signature in the form of tiny enameled crosses at each joint, a detail visible only to the wearer. Was this his quiet rebellion, embedding sacred symbols into armor that would never see combat, or simply pride in work untainted by bloodshed? Ceremonial mail also revealed the craft's unexpected versatility. In Venice, doges wore ceremonial aventails, neck guards of mail, so finely linked they resembled lace while presiding over peacetime councils. English coronation records describe queens wearing gilded mail sleeves under their robes, not for protection, but to symbolize strength. Some of the most exquisite examples weren't even wearable. Table coverings of mail draped over altars, or decorative wall hangings depicting saints with halos of interlocked brass rings. These pieces pushed the boundaries of the craft, demanding techniques never needed on the battlefield, like the Florentine weaver, who devised a way to embroider silk thread through mail to create shimmering heraldic beasts. Yet the question lingers, did these commissions bring solace or sorrow to the artisans? A guild records hint at both. A Milanese master's diary describes the joy of crafting a wedding gift hauberk with no rivets, only decorative loops, calling it the first armor that never lied. But beside it, a marginal sketch shows a weaver's hand holding a single ring, captioned, "What if all my work had been like this?" The very beauty of ceremonial mail underscored the grim norm. For every gilded collar made for a bishop's procession, there were 1,000 plain hauberks destined for the mud of Agincourt. Perhaps the most telling detail lies in what happened to these pieces after their moment in the spotlight. While battle-worn mail was recycled or repurposed, ceremonial mail was often preserved with near-religious care. The Cluny Museum's Lily hauberk, commissioned for a French prince's baptism, was found folded in lavender-scented linen centuries later, its silver rings untarnished. This tender care suggests something profound, that both wearer and maker recognized these objects as pure artistry, unsullied by their craft's darker purpose. In a world saturated with violence, these rare glimpses of mail as pure adornment became cherished anomalies, proof that the loom could weave something beyond war. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer took on a different rhythm in the 15th century, no longer shaping rings for hauberks, but forging solid plates that would render chainmail obsolete. Plate armor's rise wasn't just a technological shift, it was an existential crisis for the weavers whose families had spent generations perfecting their craft. Imagine the dread in a workshop when the first suit of articulated steel arrived in town, its smooth surfaces deflecting blows that would have sent chainmail rings flying. The very flexibility that made mail so versatile now became its weakness. A sword might not pierce it, but the crushing force of a poleaxe could shatter bones beneath the mesh. Kings and knights, always chasing the edge in survival, abandoned the loom for the anvil. Yet the decline wasn't sudden. Like twilight fading into night, chainmail lingered in the margins. Some weavers pivoted to creating gussets and voiders, small patches of mail to cover the gaps in plate armor at joints and armpits. These were humble commissions compared to the full hauberks of old, but they kept the craft alive. In Venice, artisans found niche demand for mail-lined gloves among duelists, while German workshops supplied aventails to hang from the helmets of cavalrymen. Adaptation became survival. A ledger from Nuremberg records a master weaver bartering his skills to a clockmaker, repurposing his ring-linking techniques to craft tiny chains for gear mechanisms. For others, the shift felt like betrayal. Guilds that had once sworn oaths to uphold the sacred art of the weave now watched their youngest members apprentice under armorers who worked with sheet metal. The emotional toll surfaces in rare personal accounts, like the diary of a Burgundian weaver who described melting down his rivets to cast a bell for the local church, a voice to replace the silence of my loom. Some clung stubbornly to tradition, producing ceremonial mail for tournaments or religious processions, where its symbolism outweighed its utility. A heartbreaking inventory from a failed English workshop lists unsold hauberks priced lower than the cost of their iron, their maker's desperation etched in the scribbled note, "Will trade for grain." The rise of firearms delivered the final blow. By the 16th century, even plate armor struggled against gunpowder, but chainmail's fate was sealed. Yet here lies the paradox. As its military use vanished, its cultural prestige soared. Kings who would never wear mail into battle now displayed gilded hauberks in their treasuries as relics of a nobler age. Wealthy collectors commissioned miniature mail shirts for their children's dolls, turning a warrior's protection into a plaything. The craft's twilight years birthed strange hybrids like the silken mail, worn by Elizabethan courtiers' delicate rings woven with thread, beautiful and utterly useless in combat. What did this mean for the weaver's identity? For some, obsolescence brought relief. A Swiss guild record notes an aging craftsman teaching his grandson to weave fishing nets instead, joking that the only blood these knots will catch is from trout. Others framed their transition as evolution, like the Spanish weavers who applied their patterning skills to making lace. But for many, the loss cut deeper than economics. Chainmail had been more than a trade. It was a lineage, a language of hands passed from parent to child. The last generation of true male weavers often became living archives, their knowledge preserved not in guild halls but in folk songs and tavern tales. Perhaps the most poignant legacy lies in what they chose to leave behind. In a French churchyard, archaeologists uncovered the grave of a 16th century weaver, buried with his tools, not the hammer and tongs of a blacksmith, but a tiny pair of pliers and a scattering of iron rings. His mourners had sealed his coffin with a patch of mail, as if ensuring he could take his craft and all its moral weight into the next world. The rings were unlinked at one edge, a final gesture, the weave unfinished, the dilemma unresolved. The rhythmic clinking of metal rings has found an unexpected home in the 21st century, not on battlefields, but at Renaissance fairs, cosplay conventions, and even high-end fashion runways. Modern chainmail weavers, armed with pliers and anvils instead of medieval guild mandates, are redefining what it means to master this ancient craft. Unlike their predecessors, they rarely fear their work will be tested in combat. A cosplayer's gleaming hauberk might face nothing more dangerous than convention hall fluorescent lights, while a fantasy film's costume designer painstakingly recreates historic weaves for actors who will never feel a sword's weight. This shift from necessity to artistry seems to solve the old moral equation, except the past never fully loosens its grip. Walk through any historical reenactment today, and you'll find artisans who treat chainmail with near religious reverence. Some spend years replicating obscure medieval patterns, sourcing iron mined from the same regions as their ancestors. Their workshops echo with debates over riveted versus welded rings. The merits of 4-in-1 versus 6-in-1 weaves technical purity as a form of homage. Yet the context transforms everything. When a Maryland craftsman named Jason Carter demonstrates his mail-making process online, viewers marvel as he shapes a shirt that will never bloody a battlefield. It's archaeology with creative license, he explains, holding up a sleeve that blends 12th century techniques with his own decorative flourishes. The dilemma morphs, no longer torn between art and war. Modern weavers navigate authenticity versus innovation. Fantasy culture turbocharged this revival. Game of Thrones' iconic costumes birthed a cottage industry of male artisans catering to fans wanting their own House Stark aesthetics. But something fascinating happens when chainmail escapes history's shadow. A Los Angeles designer crafts iridescent aluminum mail for drag performers, each ring anodized in shifting rainbow hues. In Tokyo, a collective fuses traditional Japanese chainmail with LED lights, creating wearable sculptures that pulse like neon constellations. These pieces celebrate the craft's visual potential while severing ties to violence, yet even here, echoes linger. One artist's statement for a museum exhibit of piecemeal admitted the ring still felt like carrying the ghost of a sword. The ethical reckoning takes new forms. Contemporary weavers face questions medieval guilds never imagined. Is it appropriate to sell historically accurate hauberks to collectors who romanticize warfare? Should fantasy designs avoid replicating real armor too closely? Some, like Scottish artisan Moira Young, incorporate symbolic ruptures, leaving deliberate gaps in weaves or using reclaimed metals. It's my way of acknowledging the craft's dark side while moving forward, she says, showing a necklace where the pattern dissolves into loose rings. Others confront the past more directly. A Berlin collective crafts mail from melted-down firearms, transforming weapons into delicate shrouds displayed at peace rallies. Technology reshapes the craft in unexpected ways. While purists work with traditional tools, 3D printing introduces plastic mail for lightweight costumes, and laser cutters enable geometric patterns impossible with hand tools. The irony, some of these innovations circle back to practicality. Firefighters in Australia trial modernized mail gloves for wildlife rescue the same flexible protection that guarded knights, now shielding hands from koala claws. A biotech startup even experiments with microscopic polymer mail for surgical mesh, its structure inspired by medieval weaves. The craft's DNA persists even as its purpose transforms. Perhaps the most telling evolution is in how chainmail functions socially today. Where medieval weavers often toiled anonymously, modern practitioners build global communities through YouTube tutorials and Reddit forums. The hashtag #Chainmail showcases everything from Byzantine-inspired jewelry to avant-garde installations where rusted rings slowly decay in glass cases, performances about impermanence. This connectivity allows for collective grappling with the craft's legacy. A viral Twitter thread debating whether fantasy armor glorifies war sparked collaborations between historians and cosplayers to create truthful displays contextualizing mail's violent origins alongside its artistry. The ultimate test may be time. Will future generations view this revival as a respectful homage or nostalgic fetishization? Museums already note a generational divide. Older visitors touch displayed hauberks with solemnity, remembering war films, while teens snap selfies comparing them to video game loot. Yet in a Sussex workshop, 90-year-old Elena Hartley teaches her great-granddaughter to weave rings using techniques passed down since the Crusades. The girl's first project, a bracelet for her cat. In that whimsical gesture lies the craft's modern truth. Chainmail's meaning now belongs as much to those who reinvent it as to those who remember its weight on battlefields. The loom's legacy, it seems, is finally free to weave its own future. The true legacy of the chainmail weavers isn't just locked behind museum glass, it's woven into the fabric of history itself. Walk through the Met's Arms and Armor collection and you'll see their work labeled dispassionately, 14th century hauberk, riveted construction. But lean closer. Those tiny, uneven rivets tell a different story, the tremor of a craftsman's hand, the sigh of relief when a row held firm. What museums catalogue as artifacts were once someone's livelihood, their pride, their moral quandary made tangible. The weavers left behind more than objects. They left fingerprints in iron, decisions etched into every interlocking ring. Consider the anonymous master behind the Wolf's Maw hauberk in Vienna's Hofburg Palace. Its collar bears an unusual pattern, a staggered weave resembling teeth. Was this a signature, a joke, or a silent protest against the wolves of war who wore his creations? We'll never know his name, but his voice echoes in the metal. Elsewhere, clues emerge in unexpected places. A church ledger in Normandy records the burial of one Henry Le Malison in 1324, noting he was interred with his tools and one unbroken ring, likely a symbol of his lifelong struggle to reconcile craft and conscience. Their impact rippled far beyond workshops. Chainmail became a metaphor in medieval literature, with poets comparing steadfast friendships to well-riveted mail and corrupt courts to rusted rings. Even religious art absorbed their imagery. A 12th century Psalter depicts Christ's resurrection with angels clad in shimmering mail, its artist clearly borrowing from real armor seen in local workshops. The weavers didn't just make armor, they shaped how an era visualized protection, unity, and resilience. Yet their greatest legacy might be the questions they force us to ask today. Modern body armor engineers still study medieval weaves for inspiration, marveling at how alternating ring patterns distributed impact, but the ethical parallels run deeper. The artisan who crafted a crusader's hauberk faced dilemmas startlingly similar to those of a drone technician or AI developer, creating tools whose ultimate use lies beyond their control. A 1521 guild ordinance from Augsburg captures this tension, requiring weavers to swear they'd take no joy in the shedding of blood, an early attempt at what we'd now call ethical manufacturing. Perhaps the most poignant remnants aren't in collections, but in absences. Archaeologists excavating a ruined workshop in Ghent found a child's tiny mail glove, its rings perfectly scaled for small fingers. No battle would ever claim this, where it was likely practice work, a father teaching his daughter the craft. Beside it lay a half-finished sleeve, its final rings left open, as if waiting for hands that never returned. These fragments remind us that behind every historical dilemma were real people, artisans who laughed over shared meals, fretted over debts, and passed tools to the next generation with hope and trepidation. Their ultimate legacy, proof that human hands can create beauty and brutality in equal measure, and that history remembers the wars far more vividly than the weavers who armed them. Yet in museums worldwide, their mail still gleams with a quiet defiance. Those interlocked rings refuse to let us forget the choices embedded in every craft, the invisible hands that shape our world, and the enduring weight of what we make. The shimmering legacy of chainmail weavers lingers not just in museums, but in the very way we think about creativity under pressure. Their rings form a metallic bridge between two worlds, one where hands shape beauty, another where that beauty serves destruction. This paradox isn't confined to the Middle Ages. Look around today. Engineers design drones with elegant algorithms, coders craft sleek apps that track soldiers, even journalists wield pens that document wars. The chainmail dilemma repeats itself endlessly, proving that the tension between craft and consequence is as timeless as iron. What makes the weaver's story so haunting is how ordinary their struggle was. They weren't philosophers debating ethics in ivory towers, they were parents bartering for bread, apprentices dreaming of masterpieces. A French weaver's diary from 1392 captures this perfectly, describing how he'd pause mid-rivet to watch his daughter play, then return to work with the weight of tomorrow's battle in my palms. Their moral calculations happened in stolen moments between hammer strikes and hearth fires. That's why their legacy resonates. It's not about grand historical forces, but the quiet choices we all make when our skills are co-opted by systems beyond our control. Yet there's hope in how their craft transcended its purpose. Modern conservators at the Royal Armouries discovered something astonishing while restoring a battered hauberk between its layers. Someone had tucked a sprig of dried lavender centuries ago. Was it a superstition, a prayer, or simply a weaver's small act of defiance, perfuming armor with the scent of peaceful fields? These human touches remind us that even in service to violence, artistry finds cracks to bloom. The weaver's greatest lesson might be their refusal of easy answers. They didn't abandon their looms en masse, nor did they blindly glorify war. Instead, they navigated the gray, honoring their craft while acknowledging its cost. A German guild's charter put it plainly: our rings shield both sinner and saint, and God alone judges the hands beneath. That nuanced acceptance feels strikingly modern. In an era where we're pressured to pick sides, art or utility, purity or compromise, their example whispers that maybe integrity lies in holding both. So the next time you see chainmail glinting in a museum case, Don't just admire the craftsmanship. Look for the fingerprints. Imagine the calloused hands that link those rings, the nights spent wondering if skill absolves complicity. Their story isn't locked in the past. It's a mirror reflecting our own dilemmas back at us. After all, aren't we all, in some way, weaving our own versions of chainmail, creating things that might outlive our intentions? The loom falls silent, but the question echoes: what will our hands leave behind?